So we'll move to our next speaker.
Okay, our next speaker is Mazen Makarem. I pronounced it right. Mazen is the analyst and assistant in the World Food Program in Lebanon country. He works on a project of vulnerability assessment and mapping unit since 2014. He has participated in the data management, analysis, and reporting of this report among Syrian refugees in Lebanon. He holds Bachelor of Science degree in agribusiness from the American University of Beirut and completed an internship in the United Nations Food Agriculture Program. تفضل مازن.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me in the back? Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank RESCAP and the UB for hosting us here. And I'm going to be talking about food consumption patterns among the Syrian refugees in Lebanon. Okay, first of all, I'm going to give a background of what was happening. So since the start of the conflict in Syria in 2011, we've had a gradual increase of refugees in Lebanon, which amounts to 1.1 million today. And WFP has been providing food assistance for those refugees since June 2012. Mainly in the form of e-vouchers, which are like credit cards where they can buy whatever they want from contracted shops. Okay. And then to better understand the refugees' vulnerability situation in Lebanon, WFP decided to conduct two assessments, one in 2013, one in 2014, which are called VASIRs, which stands for Vulnerability Assessment for Syrian Refugees. WFP was the leader of this assessment, along with the help of UNICEF and UNHCR. These assessments were multinational, were national assessments and multi-sectoral, meaning that we asked questions about education, food security, health, nutrition, wash, shelter, protection, everything. Now, for the presentation, we're going to just talk about the food consumption patterns, the potential risks of malnutrition, monitoring food consumption changes, and the recommendations we can give to food assistance programs. Okay, first of all, the methodology for the assessments was, in 2013, we stratified the refugees according to four divisions. One was the awaiting registration, one was those who were registered for less than 3 months, those who were registered between 3 and 6 months, and those who were registered for more than 6 months. For 2014, we stratified according to a regional basis, which was Akkar, Tripoli plus the 5 causes around it, Beirut, Mount Lebanon, South, and the Bekaa Valley. Okay, so this is a model from the questionnaire where we asked for the food consumption groups. You can see 17 groups, and what we asked the interviewees was how many days in the last week did they eat each of the following groups. So for example, bread pasta would usually be around 7, but we'll talk about that later. Okay, now from these questions we can identify 3 indicators. One is the household weekly diet diversity, which is the number of food groups eaten in the last week. Second one is the household daily average diet diversity, which is the average number of food groups eaten per day. And third is the food consumption score. Now, starting with the food consumption score. The food consumption score takes each food group that has been eaten, multiplied by the weight, by its respective weight. For example, we've got meat, fish, and eggs would be around 4. Well, not around exactly 4, because they're high in nutritious, high in proteins. While, for example, oil or sugar would be less, much less, around 0.5. Now, after we've calculated these weighted scores, we categorize households by 3 divisions, which is poor, borderline, and acceptable. Now, if we look, I know it might be a bit complicated, this graph, but bear with me a bit. Now, for example, if we look at 2013, we can see that 93% of households had an acceptable food consumption score, whereas in 2014, we can see this number is this percentage slightly decreased to 87%. Now, if we also look at the left side of the graph, we see differences among regions in Lebanon. So, for example, the south had the highest food consumption score on average, and with 92% of households that had an acceptable food consumption score. whereas, for example, Akkar or Beirut, Mount Lebanon had only 85%. Of course, with differences compared to borderline and poor. Now, okay. So if we look at the acceptable, just the acceptable, we can see that there's only a 6% decrease, which some of you might think is not enough. But if we look closer at those who are acceptable and we see the coping strategies they've engaged in to have that acceptable food consumption score, we see an increase in 26% almost of households that have applied food consumption coping strategies, such as reducing portion sizes, reducing the number of meals, or some more extreme, like spending days without eating, or reducing the consumption of adults and females. Okay. Now, the weekly diet diversity and the daily diet diversity. All in all, the majority of households had a good weekly and daily diet diversity. We can see 81% in 2013 and 74% in 2014. It has slightly decreased. And 63% of households in 2014 ate more than 6.5 food groups per day. Now, these are the 17 food groups we were talking about. The green section is for the households that have eaten 6 to 7 days of each food group. For example, in the last year, 94% of households ate 6 or 7 days bread or pasta, consumed bread and pasta for 6 to 7 days. And it's organized from the highest to the least. So this shows us that the acceptable food consumption scores and diet diversities do not necessarily rule out potential micronutrient deficiencies. Where if we look at the other side, the right side of the graph, we see that the most nutritious foods, such as vitamin A fruits, vitamin A vegetables, fish, organ meat, those are the least consumed food groups among the households. For example, we found that 43% of households did not consume any iron-rich food groups in the past week when we did the survey. Whereas also 60% of households did not consume any vitamin A-rich vegetables or fruits, like neither. Now, moving on, if we look at the 4 most consumed food groups, we see there are bread, condiments, sugars, and fats, which are characterized as being high in energy, but don't have any micronutrients. So high carbs, high energy, just no micronutrients. And the least 4 consumed food groups would be high in micronutrients and high in protein for fish and organ meat, but also they haven't been consumed much. The overall trend was decreasing between 2013 and 2014, where, for example, it dropped from 98% to 92% for condiments, 90% to 83% for fat, which it might seem as a good thing, but this decrease was for all food groups. Everything decreased, except for fish and organ meat, which recorded an increase between 2013 and 2014, which might seem a good thing. Okay. To conclude, although most refugees' households had an acceptable food consumption score and diet diversity, the pattern shows a potential risk of micronutrient malnutrition. So they're not getting the essential nutrients they need from their food patterns. They also have a high calorific content and low nutritious value of most consumed food groups, together with the risk of micronutrient deficiencies, could lead to a double burden of malnutrition, where you can have obesity and severe malnutrition on one side. Okay, a reduction in food consumption score and diet diversity between 2014 and 2013 without significant differences in general food patterns. So it wasn't that their food consumption got better with the quality of food or the types of food. It was, the reduction did not have any significant differences. Okay, with these results, WFP developed leaflets as a form of guidance for the refugees. When they're going to shops and buying food, it's sort of like guiding them what's the best to buy for the amount of money they have, to be smart shoppers, and to have a balanced diet. Finally, despite all limitations associated with this multi-sectoral emergency assessment, Specific analysis can provide useful insights on the risks of malnutrition and inform program design. Thank you. Are we taking questions or?
We'll take questions at the end if that's okay. We'll move on to the next speaker. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mazen.